Hey friends, so how about your work? I don't know if you use a wrench for your work, but how about it? I hope you enjoyed your Labor Day weekend, maybe off from work. If you did work during the Labor Day weekend, thank you for working during a holiday. But let's talk about our work. Do you have the type of work where you come home and you think, what's the point? Besides the paycheck that I get so I can pay for food and for rent, I really don't enjoy work. Or do you have the type of work where it's very fulfilling and you feel like you're making an impact to those in your family and around you, in your community, and maybe for the future? If so, that's awesome. Thank God for it. But have you ever had the same thought that King Solomon had when it comes to your meaningful work? This is what we studied on Sunday. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 17. King Solomon seems to be looking back at his life as he gets older, and he says this: "So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind." I'm not sure if you've ever had that meaning, that thought, but Solomon, who did some very good things, writes about it. He looks back on an empire that he's created in Israel. He's brought the kingdom of Israel to its highest point. He's extended the boundaries as far as it would ever go. He's brought peace, he brought security and prosperity. The government was operating really well. And yet King Solomon says, I hated life. It was grievous to me. And he tells us why. It's not because his work wasn't meaningful. In fact, his work was very meaningful to the people who lived under him. But there is this one issue. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. Solomon, we're going to find out, is really good at foresight. And he looks at everything he's done, and then he realizes in a moment that he's going to forfeit it all. And maybe this is saying it without saying it, but his son Rehoboam would get it all. He would rule the kingdom, he would get all the treasures, he would get everything from Solomon. And Solomon, that brought him to grieve. He thought it was evil. And he was right. In a matter of years after Solomon died, King Rehoboam took everything that Solomon had done and messed it up. He ended up tearing the kingdom in two. People rebelled against the king, and Israel was never the same again. And Solomon asked that question: if I put so much time and effort into make something good, only to have it torn down or given away or forfeited, what's the point? It's kind of like slavery. All your effort, all your work, all your time is put into something that won't be yours anymore. And the Bible calls it that, slavery to sin. That's what sin does to all of our lives. All of our efforts here, all of our work here, eventually has to be passed on to someone else. And you tried to pass it on to your loved ones and for the good of your loved ones, but sometimes it just does not work out that way, and everything you put your work into becomes essentially meaningless. How can you love your work then? How can it become meaningful? Well, let me tell you about a work that God did. When he created the world, he created it perfect. And everything worked perfectly. But then humankind turned their back on God, and all of a sudden you had a God who is love and loves his creation, and creation who despised the God who loved him. And so God went to work. He made a promise in Genesis chapter 3 that he would send someone to fix that void in their relationship, that broken relationship. And he did, in his son. Jesus came and he lived his life and he died, and all of a sudden we ask, why? How is that purposeful or meaningful at all? why would God only send his son to die? Well, you begin to see, as Jesus carries out his ministry, he understands he's part of a bigger story that's happening. He's part of a story of God mending his relationship with his people. And like all of us, all of his efforts he put in, he preached and taught. Devil, sin, and Satan tried to steal it away from him. He was put on a cross, and he died. That's the moment that we forfeit everything we've done here, but for Christ, it was completely different because rather than forfeiting it, he picked it up again. Now, all of his work that he had done, he did not forfeit over to someone else or to sin and to death. Instead, all of his work remained going. All of his work was lasting work. That's what really got Solomon. Not that he didn't do anything meaningful in his life, but that at the height of his kingdom, he would have to say, I have brought Israel to where no king has brought it, nor any king will ever again bring it. But Christ, rather than just bringing the kingdom to its height and having it fall, Christ not only dies, he rises again and continues to rule his kingdom in love. What does that mean for our work? Well, that means that even though you are part of a dead-end job, perhaps, or even if you have a very meaningful job, your work becomes part of a bigger story. Your work becomes part of God's work in his world to bring salvation to his people and to you. And even your darkest, most sinful work, God uses for the good of those who love him. He uses your sin to highlight Christ's work for you that can't be taken or can't be forfeited. It's yours forever. That means you don't have to do it again. Christ doesn't have to come back and die again for our sins because he took his life up and he reigns and rules eternally. This is what Solomon says in verse 24. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. So Solomon begins to realize we don't have to pull our value, we don't have to pull our enjoyment from the fruits of our labor. We don't have to look at ourselves on a scale of whether we've accomplished our goals or not. We look at it on a different scale. We see what Christ has accomplished in us and for us. That our sin, he's taken and put on the cross. Our lack of righteousness, he's taken his righteous, perfect life and he's put it on us. And the good news is, it keeps on going. The work never has to be done again. So for you and your work, you don't have to build a kingdom to build your value. You don't have to do anything at all. Instead, you take joy in the toil that your work is part of a better story. A story that you're now a part of through faith. A story that has a really good ending. I thank God for our holiday on Labor Day, and I hope you enjoyed it. But I hope you're encouraged as you go back to work, that your work is like working for the Lord, because he uses all of our work for his grand plan of salvation for his people and for us. That's it for today. I'm Pastor John. This is Crown of Life Church in New Orleans East. If you haven't visited us yet and are interested, we are taking all the precautions to make this a safe worship environment. We're taking all procedures to make sure we're distanced properly. So come join us. And until you do, God's peace be with you.